The cops harass black elderly woman until she makes a phone call to her son, the U.S. Attorney General. What happened to the cops will shock you. The aroma of old books and lemon polish hung heavy in Emily Carter's parlor. Sunlight streamed through lace curtains dappled across her collection of first editions. At 78, she was a landmark in Oakwood Heights, a former teacher whose home, nestled amidst manicured lawns and gated mansions, was a testament to enduring principles. Emily adjusted her spectacles, her gaze fixed on the worn photograph in her hand, a graduation picture from her teaching days. They thought I was finished, she murmured to herself, a wistful smile playing on her lips. Reduced to a relic in this gilded cage. The rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock underscored her solitude. But beneath the surface, calm, a quiet fury simmered. The neighborhood, once a haven of diverse families, had become a playground for the wealthy, their arrogance masked by forced smiles and veiled contempt. A sudden, jarring honk from the street shattered the tranquility. Emily peered through the window. A sleek black SUV idled at the curb, its tinted windows reflecting the disapproving glares of passing neighbors. Two figures emerged, imposing in their crisp, dark suits. Her breath hitched. They were the enforcers of this new Oakwood Heights, the private security guards hired to maintain property values. Their presence a constant reminder of the growing chasm between Emily and her surroundings. They think they can intimidate me, she muttered, her spine straightening. They don't know who they're dealing with. The men approached her door, their shadows lengthening across the porch. Emily set down the photograph, her hands trembling slightly. It was time to draw a line, to remind these newcomers that even in this transformed world, some things, respect, dignity, justice, were not negotiable. As the doorbell chimed, Emily Carter steeled herself. The battle had begun, and she would fight it with the same unwavering resolve she had instilled in generations of students. This quiet, seemingly fragile old woman was about to remind them that strength came in many forms and that, sometimes, the quietest voices carried the most profound impact. Her heart pounded with anticipation. The corruption will not be condoned any longer. Mrs. Carter? The taller of the two security guards, a man named Jet, spoke with calculated politeness, his eyes scanning her well-worn porch. We've received complaints about your property. Emily raised an eyebrow. Complaints? About what, precisely? Unkempt lawn, overgrown bushes, Jet replied, consulting a digital tablet. Violations of neighborhood aesthetic standards. My lawn is as it always has been, Emily countered, her voice steady. And my bushes provide privacy for the birds. They've nested in there for years. The HOA has new regulations. The second guard, Lennox, chimed in, his gaze lingering on Emily's faded paint. Compliance is mandatory. Mandatory? Emily's eyes narrowed. Or selectively enforced? She knew the reason for their visit had nothing to do with landscaping. It was about her. About her refusal to conform, to disappear into the background of their perfectly manicured world. We're just doing our job, ma'am, Jet said, his tone hardening slightly. You have 24 hours to rectify the violations, or we'll be forced to take further action. Emily crossed her arms. And what further action might that be? Fines, legal action, Lennox replied. Ultimately, forced sale of the property. Emily's eyes flashed. This is my home. My family's home for generations. You won't bully me out of it. Jet sighed, a flicker of impatience crossing his face. It doesn't have to be this way, Mrs. Carter. Just comply, and we can avoid any unpleasantness. Unpleasantness? Emily chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. You think a little overgrown lawn is unpleasant? Try systemic injustice, young man. Try the slow, suffocating weight of prejudice. The guards exchanged glances, their faces unreadable. They were out of their depth, ill-equipped to deal with Emily's unyielding spirit. We'll leave you to it then, Jet said, turning to leave. But don't say we didn't warn you. As the SUV pulled away, Emily felt a surge of adrenaline. This wasn't just about a lawn. It was about the soul of Oakwood Heights, about the struggle between those who valued community and those who saw only profit. She walked back inside, her mind racing. She needed help, someone who understood the intricacies of the law, someone who wasn't afraid to fight. Her son, Malcolm, was the obvious choice. But involving him, the U.S. Attorney General could escalate the situation, drawing unwanted attention. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Noah, a former student who'd become a successful journalist. "Mrs. Carter," Noah said, his voice urgent. "I heard about what happened with the security guards. Is everything all right?" "They're trying to intimidate me, Noah," Emily replied. "Bully me out of my home." "I knew it," Noah said, his voice hardening. "This has been happening all over Oakwood Heights. They're targeting long-time residents, trying to force them out so they can build more luxury condos." "I won't let them," Emily said, her voice resolute. "But I need your help. I need someone to shine a light on this." "I'm on it," Noah replied. "I'll start digging. See what I can uncover." As Emily hung up, she felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't alone. She had allies, people who believed in justice, people who wouldn't let the powerful trample on the vulnerable. But she also knew that this was just the beginning. The fight was far from over, and the stakes were higher than ever. The storm is gathering strength. Noah's investigation quickly uncovered a web of corruption connecting the HOA, the security company, and several prominent city officials. He found evidence of rigged property assessments, inflated fines, and suspiciously lenient rulings in eviction cases. "It's a protection racket, Mrs. Carter," Noah said, his voice grim. "They're squeezing people until they break, then swooping in to buy their properties for pennies on the dollar." Emily wasn't surprised. She had suspected something like this all along. But seeing the evidence laid bare, the sheer scope of the operation sent a chill down her spine. Meanwhile, the pressure on Emily intensified. The HOA filed new complaints: faded paint, cracked sidewalk, and a dangerous tree limb. The security guards became a constant presence, patrolling her street, their eyes fixed on her every move. One afternoon, as Emily was tending her garden, a car screeched to a halt in front of her house. A woman named Marigold, dressed in a pristine white suit, stepped out, her eyes filled with disdain. "Mrs. Carter," Marigold said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I'm from the Oakwood Heights Historical Preservation Society. We're concerned about the dilapidated condition of your property." "My home is perfectly fine," Emily replied, her hands gripping her gardening trowel. "It's an eyesore," Marigold countered. "It brings down property values. We're prepared to offer you a generous sum to sell." Emily's eyes flashed. "This is not for sale. And I suggest you leave my property before I call the police." Marigold smirked. "The police are on our side, Mrs. Carter. They understand the importance of maintaining order." As Marigold walked away, Emily felt a surge of anger. They were closing in, tightening the noose. She needed to act, to expose their corruption, before it was too late. That night, Noah published his exposé online. The article went viral, sparking outrage and calls for an investigation. However, the city officials who were implicated in the scandal quickly moved to discredit the story. "It's fake news," Mayor Emery declared at a press conference. "A baseless attack by disgruntled residents." The local news outlets, controlled by the same powerful interests that were driving the corruption, echoed the mayor's narrative. Noah's article was dismissed as a conspiracy theory, and his credibility was attacked. But the truth had been unleashed, and it couldn't be contained. Independent bloggers and citizen journalists picked up the story, amplifying Noah's findings. The public outcry grew louder. The turning point came when a former police officer, Elias, contacted Noah with inside information about the corruption within Precinct 18, the local police station. "It's rotten to the core," Elias said, his voice filled with disgust. "They're protecting the powerful, preying on the vulnerable." Elias provided Noah with evidence of falsified reports, tampered evidence, and payoffs to corrupt officers. He also revealed the existence of a secret room in Precinct 18 where sensitive files were stored. Armed with this new information, Noah decided to confront Chief Callahan, the head of Precinct 18. He arrived at the police station early one morning, determined to get answers. But Callahan refused to meet with him. As Noah waited in the lobby, he noticed two officers, Mitchell and Harass, watching him with menacing eyes. "You're stirring up trouble, kid," Mitchell said, his voice low and threatening. "You should watch your back." Noah ignored them, his gaze fixed on Callahan's office door. He knew that exposing the corruption within Precinct 18 was the key to unraveling the entire conspiracy. He just needed to find a way to get inside, to uncover the truth that they were so desperately trying to hide. The truth is out there, just waiting to be seen. Driven by a gut feeling and the information from Elias, Noah returned to Precinct 18 late that night, disguised as a delivery driver. He knew he was taking a huge risk, but he had to find that secret room. The precinct was eerily quiet, the overnight shift operating with a practiced indifference. Noah managed to slip past the front desk, his heart pounding in his chest. He navigated the labyrinthine corridors, his eyes scanning the doors. He had a rough idea of where the secret room was located based on Elias's description. As he reached a dead end, he noticed a loose panel in the wall. He pried it open, revealing a narrow passage. His pulse quickened. This was it. He squeezed through the passage, finding himself in a small, windowless room. The air was stale and musty. Files were stacked haphazardly on shelves, their labels obscured by dust. Noah began to search, his hands trembling with anticipation. He knew that these files held the key to exposing the corruption, to bring down the powerful figures who had been preying on Oakwood Heights for so long. Suddenly, he heard footsteps approaching. He froze, his blood running cold. He was trapped. The door burst open, and Chief Callahan stood there, his face contorted with rage. "So, the reporter," Callahan snarled, his hand reaching for his gun. "I should have known." Noah didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, tackling Callahan to the ground. A struggle ensued, the small room erupting in chaos. Callahan managed to break free, his gun pointed at Noah's head. "This is the end of the line, kid," he said, his voice shaking. "You should have left well enough alone." Just as Callahan was about to pull the trigger, the door burst open again. Emily Carter stood there, her face grim, holding a taser she had taken from a fallen officer, her eyes filled with fury. "Let him go, Callahan," Emily said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Or you'll regret it." Callahan hesitated, his gaze shifting between Noah and Emily. He had underestimated this seemingly fragile old woman. He had never imagined that she would be the one to stand in his way. Emily didn't give him a chance to react. She fired the taser, the prongs hitting Callahan squarely in the chest. He screamed in agony, his body convulsing as he collapsed to the floor. Noah scrambled to his feet, grabbing Callahan's gun. He pointed it at the fallen chief, his hand shaking. "It's over, Callahan," he said, his voice trembling. "You're finished." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. They knew what just happened, that this was the end, now. Justice is coming soon. The police stormed into Precinct 18, their weapons drawn. But they weren't there to arrest Noah and Emily. They were there to arrest Callahan and his corrupt officers. Federal agents, alerted by an anonymous tip, had arrived to take control of the situation. The evidence Noah had found in the secret room, combined with Elias's testimony and the recording of Callahan's confession, was enough to trigger a full-scale investigation. Callahan and his officers were arrested, their faces filled with shock and disbelief. The corruption within Precinct 18 had been exposed, and the entire house of cards was about to come crashing down. As Emily and Noah emerged from the police station, they were greeted by a cheering crowd. People had gathered to celebrate their victory, and Odo thanked them for their courage and their unwavering commitment to justice. The news spread like wildfire, the story of Emily Carter and Noah's battle against corruption dominating headlines around the world. The powerful figures who had been preying on Oakwood Heights for so long were finally being held accountable. Mayor Emery was forced to resign, and his reputation was shattered. Judge Quinton, another accomplice for Callahan's crimes and corruption, was disbarred and faced criminal charges. The security company was shut down, and its licenses were revoked. The HOA was dissolved and replaced by a new organization committed to fairness and transparency. Malcolm, alerted to the situation and the danger his mother had put herself in, arrived with federal agents. He held Emily tightly, relief washing over him. "You scared me, Mom," he said, his voice trembling. "But I'm so proud of you." Emily smiled, her eyes filled with love. "I just did what was right, Malcolm," she said. "Someone had to stand up to them." The investigation into the corruption continued, revealing a complex web of bribery, extortion, and abuse of power. The evidence was overwhelming, the scope of the scandal far greater than anyone had initially imagined. The trials began, each one bringing new revelations and new convictions. Former officers testified against their superiors, business owners recounted their experiences with extortion, and citizens shared their stories of abuse and injustice. One by one, the corrupt officials were brought to justice, their careers ruined, their reputations destroyed, and their lives forever changed. The storm has ended, but in the aftermath, justice begins now. Years later, Oakwood Heights had been transformed. The power structures had been dismantled, the corrupt officials replaced by honest and dedicated public servants. Emily Carter, once seen as a relic in a changing world, had become a symbol of hope and resilience. Her courage inspired others to stand up for what was right, to demand accountability from their leaders, and to fight for justice in their communities. She continued to live in her home, her garden thriving, her spirit unbroken. She had shown the world that even in the face of overwhelming power, one person could make a difference, that even the quietest voices could change the course of history. And so, Emily Carter sat on her porch, the setting sun casting long shadows across her lawn. She smiled, a peaceful, knowing smile. The fight had been hard, the sacrifices great, but the victory had been worth it. She had left a profound mark on the world, a testament to the enduring power of justice. And as the stars began to twinkle in the twilight sky, Emily knew that her work was far from over. The world is not fixed, there is a continuous search for justice.